Hey there everybody, I'm Jonathan Winske. I'm one of the seasonal rangers here at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. I'd like to welcome you all to Point Park. Has anybody been here before? Okay, alright, well I can't make stuff up today then. Wherever you're from, we're happy that you guys have elected to spend your 4th with us today. Hopefully you'll find it fun and educational. So let's go ahead and get started. We're just going to hang out probably just down here at this first overlook because we can see just about everything we need to see from that point. And lucky for us, it's a nice, cool, breezy day. It's a bit odd for the 4th of July, but it's really nice. Alright, well, once again, welcome to Chattanooga for those of you who haven't been here before. This is Point Park. This is the site where we commemorate one of the major campaigns of the American Civil War. In the fall of 1863, over 150,000 soldiers came here to fight over control of the town of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And during the course of 3 or 4 months, nearly 46,000 of those soldiers become casualties. That means killed, wounded, or missing during the fighting in and around Chattanooga. Ultimately, this will become a Union victory. But let's delve into this. You know, why does fighting happen here? You can look down here and see the downtown Chattanooga. Today is a town of about 170,000 people. 330,000 or so live in the greater Chattanooga area. Now, so it's it's a fairly small city, and 150 years ago this was the same way. This was a small but growing and bustling town of about 2,500 people, definitely a regional hub. But there's not a whole lot in the city itself that makes it strategic. What makes it strategic is actually its location. We're standing here near the point of Lookout Mountain. Lookout Mountain runs for about 85 miles back into Georgia and Alabama. It's actually I think mountain is actually sort of a misnomer. It's just really a very tall plateau. You can look up here to the north and see a part of the Sand Mountain Range. Sand Mountain Range runs for about 100 miles up into northeastern Tennessee and for another 100 miles back into Georgia and Alabama. Then beyond that, you've got the remainder of the Cumberland Mountains and the Cumberland Plateau. Just below us here, you can see the Tennessee River that starts up in northeastern Tennessee and winds its way through the mountains here and out to the west. And then there's this expansive valley that you can see. Locally, this is known as the Chattanooga Valley, but this is actually part of a much larger geographic structure called the Great Valley of Appalachia. Now, the Great Valley of Appalachia actually separates the Cumberland Mountains on the west from the Blue Ridge on the east, which if you look very closely, if you're lucky, you can see very faintly through the haze some of the peaks of the Blue Ridge over in North Carolina and South Carolina from here. Now, this valley actually runs the entire length of the Appalachian Mountain Range. If you're a Civil War buff, you've probably heard of the Shenandoah Valley, right? This turns into the Shenandoah Valley up in Virginia, so it's the same feature. Now, these mountains, both the Blue Ridge and the Cumberland, sort of serve as a natural barrier between north and south and east and west, right? And so, if we take this narrative all the way back to 1838, which is when you start having whites move into this area in significant numbers in the immediate aftermath of the Cherokee removal, they're coming here precisely because this is at a strategic crossroads. You have a series of gaps and passes that are going to allow you easy access through the mountains to the west. And if we carry this narrative forward a little bit, in the 1840s and 50s, the United States is starting to expand to the west, and we're starting to build railroads to the west. But you've got this natural barrier that is the Cumberland Mountains that's sort of posing a problem for you. You've got a couple of options. You can try to blow your way through the mountains, which is potentially a very expensive and hazardous process. You can try to build up and over the mountains, which also is expensive and hazardous, or you can try to find these natural gaps and passes through the mountains through which to build your rail lines. And Chattanooga is at the head of several of these gaps and passes. And so by 1860, you've got 4 different railroads that intersect right here in Chattanooga. And from Chattanooga, you can get fairly easily to pretty much anywhere in the South. You're trying to go from Memphis, Tennessee to Richmond, Virginia. You're trying to go from Richmond to Atlanta, Georgia, or any combination therein. The easiest way by far is to actually come through Chattanooga. And so, though it's a fairly small, or it's a smaller city at this point in time, it's still extremely significant because it's a transportation hub. Now, and so this is why 150,000 soldiers in part come to fight here. Abraham Lincoln actually says that taking Chattanooga is as important as taking Richmond, Virginia. Alright, so the capital of the Confederacy, he equates the capital of the Confederacy as having equal standing with this small 2,500 person town. Now, why does he say that? Well, it's because if a Union army can take Chattanooga, then you are really going to make it a lot more difficult for a Confederate army to move the troops and supplies that it needs from point A to point B. The other reason is because this gives you a foothold in the Deep South. Now, why is that important? Who knows what is about 90 or 100 miles south of here?
Atlanta?
Atlanta, city of Atlanta, Georgia. What's in Atlanta in 1860? Say what?
Industries?
Industry, right? It's a railroad hub. Now, you might say industry. The South didn't have any industry in the Civil War. It was largely agrarian. This is true. Your major economic process in the South, I guess, at this point in time is, growing cotton, growing indigo, growing tobacco, these major cash crops that serve as an international export that brings a lot of money into the South. But there is a little bit of industry. At the beginning of the Civil War, about 90% of the industry in the United States was in the North. And that leaves 10% of the industry, you guessed it, in the South. And what a lot of people don't know is if you consider that 10% of industry that was in the South in 1860, and we hypothetically consider the 11 states that are about to secede from the Union in 1860 and 61 to be one nation at that time, they would have, depending on which list you're looking at, they would have been either the 4th or 5th largest industrial nation in the world in 1860. So there's a significant amount of industry already in the South, and as this war is going to go on, they're going to start to expand this industry. And so much so that by the time this battle happens here in Chattanooga, the South is making most of its own equipment, most of its own supplies that it needs to fight the war. And this military-industrial complex is centered, there's a little bit of it up around Richmond, but most of it is actually centered beyond this natural barrier that is the Cumberland and the Appalachian Mountains in the Deep South. Now, by 1863, this war has been going on for 2 years, which is longer than anybody could have imagined at the beginning of the war. At the beginning of the war, the mindset was, on both sides was, well, we're going to go out, we're going to have a couple of major battles, and then the other side is going to give up and go home. Well, by 1863, 2 years into this war, hundreds of thousands of lives into this war, there's no end in sight. So, in early 1862, the United States government had changed its approach to fighting this war, and it had gone from an approach that would have the Union Army just simply striving to defeat the Confederate Army on the battlefield. Yes, we need to defeat the Army on the battlefield, but we also need to take away their ability to fight, because that's the only way that we're going to get the Confederacy to give up this contest. And so if you're going to take away the ability to fight, you have to take away their economic capacity, take away their agricultural capacity, but you also have to take away their industrial capacity. If you're going to do that, then you need a foothold in the Deep South from which to supply a massive army as it drives towards the city of Atlanta, Georgia, or Columbus, Georgia, Augusta, Georgia, Montgomery, Alabama, Selma, Alabama. All of these are major industrial centers for the Confederate States of America. And so this is exactly what happens here in Chattanooga. After the fall of Chattanooga in November of 1863, this is going to serve as a supply base as General William Tecumseh Sherman takes a 100,000-man army, essentially following the Western and Atlantic Railroad down to Atlanta, which ultimately is sort of the the last major, I'm not going to say the last major thing to fall for the Confederacy, but this is really, once the Confederacy loses Atlanta, it's the beginning of the end. It's only a matter of time before the South collapses. So this is a major campaign for the Civil War, often overlooked in the course of Civil War studies, but I would personally argue that this might even be a little bit more important than Gettysburg, but that's a different program. But this is, a significant target, as we can tell by the fact that there are 150,000 soldiers that come here to fight over this town.